As I explained in the opening message of this series, the title comes from, it's a takeoff on the best-selling book, Tuesdays with Morrie, by Mitch Albom. Morrie Schwartz was the author's professor and mentor at Brandeis University in Waltham, Massachusetts. Albom became an award-winning sports columnist and commentator in Detroit. And Schwartz continued to teach at Brandeis until he was diagnosed with ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease, and eventually was interviewed by Ted Koppel on the old Nightline television show. Morrie happened to see that interview and called his professor right away, and they began a conversation, and it was so significant that he decided he wanted to see him, and so he flew from Detroit to Boston, had a great time together, and he decided he was going to do that every Tuesday until his professor passed away. And so in that one-on-one relationship, they talked about things that you would talk about as you come toward the end of your life. You don't talk about trivialities at a time like that. You talk about things that matter. And so they talked about life and love and work and community and family and aging and forgiveness and even death. As precious as those Tuesdays had to be between Mitch and Morrie, I think the Sundays with Jesus that we're spending this summer can be even more life-changing. We're reading about this in a book which Jesus' closest earthly friend wrote, John. But rather than being just a sentimental treatise of Jesus' life, he had a very specific purpose in mind. John 20:31 shares that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing, you may have life in his name. We're asking the question, what would it take to convince the average person on the street that a carpenter's son from a remote village in the Middle East was in fact God in the flesh? And what would it take to convince the average person on the street that he or she should become 100% fully devoted follower of his, to believe everything that he said? Absolutely. And to do everything that he asked. Well, that's what John is challenging people to do in this gospel. He's unabashedly recruiting people to become fully devoted followers of Jesus. And every miracle, every interview, every incident and lesson that he included in his gospel was focused on that purpose. And so he chose highlights from the life of Jesus, not simply to inspire us, but to evangelize people who needed Christ, to recruit them to become part of the kingdom of Jesus Christ. Last Sunday, we studied the very first miracle that Jesus performed, the changing natural water into fine wine. Today, we're going to eavesdrop on a very private conversation between Jesus and a spiritual seeker. Among other things, this message is for those of us who have ever struggled with fear and guilt as it relates to evangelism. Have you ever had those things? Fear and guilt when it related to evangelism? And this talks about, we get to see the master at work in the way that he turned this conversation around from the natural things to the spiritual things. Now, to kind of put this maybe in a vernacular that we'll be better able to understand, most of us are probably somewhat familiar with the story, but we want to see how it might have played out if it happened in North Platte, Nebraska in 2019.
Seriously? Sorry, but do you mind if I sit here?
Please do, yeah.
Thanks. Wow, Starbucks is just slammed today.
I know. Would you please give me a drink?
Excuse me?
Would you please give me a drink?
Oh, I don't work here.
I know.
Really? No name tag. I'm just here to get my usual cup of Italian roast, you know?
I see that. But if you knew who it was that was asking you for a drink, you would be asking me for one.
And why is that? Do you own this place or something?
No. But I can fill your cup with something that will never run dry.
Perpetual Starbucks on tap. Now, that is an idea that I could get behind. That would save me a ton of cash.
I could save more than that for you.
Is that right? What are you, some sort of miracle worker or something?
I am.
Huh. Okay.
Well, how about you call your husband then and have him come join us for a cup? How's that sound?
My husband, oh, I'm not married.
I know.
Oh, right. No ring here.
No. But you've had 5 husbands, and the man you're with now, well, he isn't your husband.
Look, I don't know you or what you want with me, but I really don't need another person sticking their nose into my life. I've had enough of that over the years.
I know.
You do.
And I know your deepest need, Samantha, which isn't Italian roast Starbucks there.
How do you know my name?
I know everything about you.
Apparently. So, what are you, God?
In the flesh.
You're God, in the flesh, in Starbucks.
Yep.
This is getting very weird. Tell you what, you have a good day. All right, just one thing though. Look, I'll admit, Starbucks is not my greatest need. I understand that. And, okay, it's true, my life is a mess. In fact, all right, my life is a complete disaster. But somehow it feels like you already knew all of that, so what is it then? What is my greatest need?
Well, Samantha, your greatest need is for me.
Are you going to be here for a little bit?
For a little while longer.
I'll be back. Yeah, I'll be back. Yeah. Okay, I just had the weirdest conversation at Starbucks. Right, there's this guy here, and he proceeds to tell me everything about my life. Yeah, no. Way more than a Google search. Yeah, there's just something about him. No, you need to meet him. Yeah, I'm on my way to your house. Yeah, you're coming with me. Yeah, I'll be there in 5.
See you, Jesus. As the story opens, I want you to see specifically how Jesus tapped into her curiosity. I'm going to ask Jonah McGill to come up and Sam McGill and read for us throughout this message, really. And so we're going to be looking at John chapter 4, and he's going to pick it up in verse 1.
Good morning. Now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself did not baptize, but only his disciples, he left Judea and departed again for Galilee. And he had to pass through Samaria. So he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, so Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman from Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his son and his livestock." Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water."
The more we learn about the lifestyle of this woman, it's likely that she had heard virtually every pickup line. By the way, for those of you who are single and looking, I just thought as a public service to you today, I would provide a few pickup lines that may be helpful around church. So those of us who are married, ignore these completely. But for the rest who are single, you may find some of these, and they're cheesy, but you know pickup lines are always cheesy, right? So here's 10 of them. First of all, last night, I was reading the book of Numbers, and I realized I don't have yours. Pretty good, isn't it? I didn't believe in predestination until tonight. Number 8, the word says, "Give drink to those who are thirsty and feed the hungry." How about dinner? Smooth. This one you have to be kind of a Bible scholar on. "Your hair is like a flock of goats descending from Gilead." You have to read the book of Song of Solomon, find out what that's all about. "How many times do I have to walk around you to make you fall for me?" Like that Jericho thing going. Number 5, how would you like to join my purpose-driven life? Number 4, I believe one of my ribs belongs to you. Number 3, I'm no Joseph. Perhaps you can help me interpreting the dreams I've been having about you. This guy's really good. Number 2, is your name Faith? Because you're the substance of things I've hoped for. Hebrews 11. And finally, if none of those work, you float my ark. It didn't take long for this Samaritan woman, and we'll call her Samantha, to figure out that Jesus was not on the make. He was not looking for a hookup. He did pique her curiosity by his attitudes and ideas, first of all about common prejudice. You're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? To begin with, it blew her mind that he would even notice her, let alone talk to her or ask for a favor. The bad blood between the Jews and Samaritans was legendary. It dated back at least 450 years before this. Samaritans, of course, were Jews that actually stayed behind in Israel when the nation went into Babylonian captivity for 70 years. And because of that, they were kind of viewed as traitors. So when they stayed behind in Jerusalem, they intermarried with non-Jews and developed their own hybrid religion, their own pagan kind of religion. When the Jews returned after 70 years in captivity, they viewed the Samaritans as traitors, as the black sheep of the Jewish fold. Samaria was actually a region, a city or a county between Judea in the south and Galilee in the north. The prejudice, by the way, this area today is called the West Bank. You probably heard the West Bank referred to on the news. The prejudice between and against Samaritans was so strong that most Jews en route between Galilee and Judah would take a long detour so they would not have to go into Samaria. And they would double their time, but they did not want to go through this region, which would be somewhat like traveling from North Platte to Grand Island through Broken Bow to avoid going through Kearney. You know, you take the long way around because you didn't want to go through this region. In addition to being a Samaritan, Samantha expected discrimination for a couple other reasons. First of all, she was a woman and he was a rabbi. He was a Jewish teacher. Rabbinical law banned rabbis from speaking to any women in public, and that included their own wives and sisters. In addition to that, she was a divorcee. She was living with her boyfriend, and Jesus was a man of the cloth, and so reason to avoid her. Bible historians have pointed out that this well was on the outskirts of the town of Sychar, and she was there at a strange time of the day. Respectable wives and mothers wanted nothing to do with a person like Samantha. And so they had their times when they went to the well, probably earlier in the morning or later in the evening, but they didn't go in the middle of the day, which was the hot part of the day. But that is when Samantha chose to go to the well. She had this reputation. She had scandal connected with her. So she came to draw water at noon, when there would be less traffic around the well, and she could avoid any awkward confrontations with people. Samantha was an outcast on several levels. I started thinking about some of the people that we think of as outcasts. As evangelical Christians, there are some people that we may not be too comfortable around, that we may try to avoid because we don't know how to handle it. Muslims, Mormons, gays, lesbians, transgenders, people with live-in lovers, liberal Democrats, unwed parents, people that we tend to avoid, that we feel awkward around, and may even despise because of their religion or their lifestyle or their philosophy. How might Jesus engage people like that in conversation? What attitude is he likely to project toward people in those kinds of categories? Would he project judgment? Would he show respect? Would he demonstrate compassion? Would he show interest in them? Would he ask questions? Would he encourage them? This section really challenged me to pay more attention to the people that I encounter during the day. People who serve me at restaurants, flight attendants, salespeople. It's not that I may feel prejudice against these people, but I can treat them as if they're just part of the landscape. They're just kind of doing their jobs. And I need to learn to engage them in conversation to determine their openness to spiritual things. As we've served around the country in different places as in interim ministry, we've had an opportunity to engage, obviously, with a lot of people, not simply in the churches, but also in the communities where they are. In one of our assignments in New York, we lived right next door to an elderly lady. She'd been a widow for a number of years, and she didn't exactly have a vivacious personality, an outgoing personality. She kind of kept to herself. And Lois took the initiative to just go next door and introduce herself and found it was really hard to even converse with her. But finally, she decided that she was going to get better acquainted with her. And so every Saturday morning, she took coffee from our house, and she went over and just shared it with her, and they engaged in conversation together. Eventually, they went out to lunch together, and then eventually Lois started taking her to things like doctor's appointments, found out she had a very difficult marriage, an abusive relationship from her husband, had a strained relationship with her children. She had never been to church in her life. Never, ever. So this was an amazing thing. But Lois continued to reach out to her, just to engage her. And in time, she actually started coming to church with us, even though she'd never been in church before. And eventually, it was actually after we left that church, where she continued to go and the church people continued to surround her, that we found out that she had come to faith in Jesus Christ. What did it take? It took noticing her, putting her on the radar screen, rather than doing the natural thing, the easier thing, which is just to kind of ignore people, to put them in the backdrop there. Sometimes we need to take that special effort to notice the people in our lives. I've had servers in restaurants express real surprise when I actually just simply ask them, and how are you doing today? After they'd send the obligatory, how you doing? You just say, well, how's it going for you today? And that seems like such a simple thing. They say, well, thanks for asking. I remember going to an Applebee's several times when we were in Columbus, Nebraska, several years ago, and seeing the same waiter, server, time after time. And so we'd engage in a little bit more conversation every time. And then one day I said, well, how's your week been? And she says, it's really been a hard week. And she just shared a couple of things with me. And I said, can I pray with you right now? And she kind of looked around and she said, I'd really like that. You know, it starts with just noticing the folks around us. Just noticing the people around us and engaging in the most basic conversation and looking for that opportunity to turn it from the natural things to the more spiritual things. Jesus also tapped into her curiosity about living water when he talked about this thing called living water. And the woman responded, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water. Now, you've heard of the book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. Jesus and Samantha had kind of a Mars-Venus conversation there for a while, virtually talking different languages. Samantha was focused on the physical. Jesus was talking about the spiritual. On the physical level, living water meant water that comes from a spring, as opposed to water that is in a cistern or water that is in a well that has to be put there. So we're talking about water that's moving and water that's flowing like in a river. And she wondered, do you know something about a spring that I don't know about? And obviously that's where she was talking about living water from a physical standpoint. But Jesus was speaking in metaphor. He was talking about a new kind of life that provides satisfaction and refreshment and energy and joy. It's living water. I think he was talking about the Holy Spirit, who eventually would come and indwell believers. That he would be an unlimited source, a flowing source of power for life. Among other things, I think one of the things I really see about Jesus in this, and that is that he was an engaging conversationalist. It would have been fascinating to have a conversation with him. And after this brief interchange, Samantha was hooked. She wanted to know more. Boy, I wish I was better at doing that. I wish I was better at transitioning from the physical things to the more spiritual things. We had a missionary friend that we supported for many years, Ron Mitchell, and I'd seen him at work, and he was able to do this in the most unassuming kind of ways. And sometimes he'd do it in department stores. I saw him do it at a train depot in Russia, where he would simply engage the people around in friendly conversation. And then on so many occasions, you'd see him praying with that person and many times leading them to faith in Jesus Christ. Jesus offered this social spiritual outcast something no one had ever offered her before. Fresh, cold, pure, clear, living water. And that's the same thing that we have to offer as well to the people who are around us, who may be tired and parched and thirsty. People that we encounter every day, that we can bring that refreshment to. Our next door neighbor needed encouragement. She needed refreshment. She needed that act of kindness so that she could see in physical form the love of Jesus. Rather than keeping this conversation on the philosophical level, Jesus quickly but smoothly transitioned the conversation as he began to probe into her sensibilities. Jonah, if you'd come back up, he's going to read verses 16 through 30. And by the way, when we're talking about sensibilities here, we're talking about things we feel strongly about, something that is very personal and emotional, something that's close to the heart. That's what Jesus tapped into.
Jesus said to her, "Go, call your husband and come here." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband,' for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true." The woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know. For salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming, and is now here, when the true worshiper will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know that the Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things." Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. Just then his disciples came back. They marveled that he was talking with a woman. But no one said, What do you seek? Or why are you talking with her? So the woman left her water jar and went away into town and said to the people, Come, see a man who told me all that I ever did. Can this be the Christ? They went out of the town and were coming to him.
We're talking about sensitive issues, kind of the more emotional issues. That can be everything from sex to finances to religion. Things that you just share, very sparingly. You share it with people who are close to you or people you really trust, whether they're doctors or counselors or pastors, your spouse, trusted friends. A while back, I was talking to our stockbroker on the phone. I was on the back deck, and Lois was out working in the yard. That's a good sign. She's out working. I'm up talking. And anyway, so when I hung up from him, she said, well, what did he say? And I started kind of shouting out to her things about our investments and things about our money and stuff like that. And then I stopped to think, maybe the neighbors didn't really need to know all this information. Maybe it would be a good idea that we have this conversation more in private than we have it in open ways like that. Well, it's that kind of conversation we're talking about. In the case of Samantha, he asked a probing question about relationships when he simply said, what about your husband? Go call your husband. Now, this is a place where sometimes we can misinterpret Jesus' attitude and his tone of voice. I mean, it almost sounds like he set her up a little bit, where he says he's omniscient and he already knows the stuff. And he says, hey, call your husband. And she says, I don't have a husband. And he said, well, yeah, gotcha. I happen to know for a fact that you've had 5 of them, and the guy you're with now you're not even married to. So was he judging her? Was he scolding her? Was he making her feel even lower and lonelier than she already felt? I think what Jesus was doing here was uncovering a life issue, helping her face the frustrations in her life. Samantha had spent years looking for love, hoping that the right man would come along and meet all of her needs for provision and protection and affirmation. But one after another, those relationships failed. Rejection after rejection after rejection after rejection after, count them, rejection. 5 times. I'd like you to listen to these comments from Ray Stedman, a wonderful pastor and scholar. He said, falling in love imparts an arm-flailing ecstasy, a beat in the blood, a heady euphoria. You can hear about it in the popular songs of any day. It's June and January because I'm in love. All the songs reflect the yearning of people after a new affair, a new sense of this euphoric excitement. This is what this woman wanted. But that kind of excitement is intended to lead to marriage and to simmer down into a steadier, growing, deeper, richer kind of love which is intended to last a lifetime. C.S. Lewis rightly said, listen to this quote, I think it's great. That richer, quieter love is the fuel on which the engine of life runs. Falling in love is the explosion that gets it started. Isn't that great? But many insist on living in the heady intoxication of falling in love. They long to have that preserved and perpetuated. It's simply impossible to do that. It cannot be retained no matter how hard a couple may try. If they're unwilling to let that go, they never allow the deeper love to form. When romance fades, as it always does, they become restless. They feel cheated, deprived, angry. Eventually, they feel desperate, trapped. They fling over the old. A new partner appears, and they fall in love again. These fires begin to glow again, never quite as brightly as the last time. There's always a diminishing return. At last, they end up as millions are doing today, like this woman who had 5 husbands. Jesus hit a nerve, didn't he? He hit a nerve with Samantha. He uncovered the same kind of pain that some of you have experienced through rejection or divorce. I haven't experienced that in my life, but I can't imagine anything more painful. And all around us, there are people who have experienced that kind of rejection time and time and time again because of broken relationships. It seems like Samantha was so uncomfortable talking about her personal pain with a stranger that she changed the subject into a discussion about religion. Where's the right place, in our vernacular, to say, what's the right church? Or where's the right place to go to church? Where's the right place to worship? Now, in looking at this a little bit more deeply, I'm not sure that it was just her changing the subject, because she understood that Jesus was more than a Jewish rabbi. He was a prophet. He knew stuff. He knew stuff you don't normally know about somebody else. There's no way a stranger in town could have known all that. I think she was asking him, how or where can I find God? Where can I find God? My religion has not brought peace or satisfaction. Maybe yours will. In other words, she was willing to change churches, to travel to Jerusalem and worship there if it would really help. So tired of the emptiness and sadness and guilt. Jesus doesn't tell her she needs to convert to Orthodox Judaism. Instead, he shares two principles about genuine worship, on how to hook up with God and how to have a real relationship with Him when they engage in this worship conversation. Samaritans, like Samantha, tended to worship God in spirit, but without truth. They were sincere when they built their own temple, and they built their hybrid religion, kind of the best of all beliefs, kind of what the New Age religions are today. And the goal is to bring satisfaction by removing all guilt for violating godly standards, to emphasize experience and emotion over truth. Many Jews, on the other hand, tended to worship in truth but without spirit, mindlessly performing the rituals and reciting the prayers just as their ancestors had done for centuries. But many of them had lost the sense of God's presence and power in their worship. In his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus warned against vain repetition, saying these same things over and over and over again, hoping that they'll put meaning into them. I want to summarize it like this. To worship God in spirit, that is with energy and sincerity, but without truth, is heresy. It's heresy. To worship God in truth, that is being doctrinally sound, but without spirit, is hypocrisy. Samantha's response proved that she was really eager to have a relationship with God, not just a religion. By the way, when she left, another translation says she went back to Sychar and talked to the men. I think this translation said she went back to talk to the people, but another translation said she went to talk to the men. Well, just gathering her former husbands and lovers would make a pretty good crowd, right? Pretty good sized congregation right there. And my guess is that she kind of ambled to the well. But then she sprinted back to town. She was excited about something. Something was going on here, and she couldn't wait to tell other people about it. She was refreshed. She was invigorated as if she'd swallowed a bottle of cold, sparkling water. And it may be in a service like this or in a conversation with somebody who cares that you see a live nerve is hit. Something that you're very sensitive about. And it could be religion or it could be romance. God touches that sore spot in order to get your attention. To tell you that neither of those things were going to bring you satisfaction. None of those things are going to quench the thirst that you really have. Religion can't do it, and romance can't do it. You need something more. You need something different. God knows all about you. And He knows how to fill that emptiness. He knows how to quench the thirst. Jesus was so impassioned about sharing this living water with people that He made outreach a daily priority. In these next few verses, I see an intensity about Jesus that's almost scary. Joan, I'm going to ask you to read 31 all the way down to 38, if you would.
Meanwhile, the disciples were urging him, saying, "Rabbi, eat." But he said to them, "I have food to eat that you do not know about." So the disciples said to one another, "Has anyone brought him something to eat?" Jesus said to them, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. Do you not say there are yet 4 months? Then comes the harvest? Look, I tell you, lift up your eyes and see that the fields are white for harvest. Already the one who reaps is receiving wages and gathering fruit for eternal life, so that sower and reaper may rejoice together. For here the saying holds true, one sows and another reaps. I sent you to reap that for which you did not labor. Others have labored, and you have entered into their labor."
I think it's pretty safe to say Jesus led a purpose-driven life, right? He's pretty well focused on what he came to do and on the people around him. Reaching out to people like Samantha was his life priority, and it was more important to him than eating. His disciples urged him, "Rabbi, eat something," but he said, "I have food to eat that you know nothing about." Unlike me, Jesus didn't build his life around meals. He built his life around ministry to people. And I can imagine him having long conversations with the wait staff at a restaurant while his food gets cold. So committed to this mission that he valued it also above resting. I think the disciples may have thought he was hallucinating when he looks at this crowd of people that are coming out from Sychar, coming out to the well, because the woman Samantha had gotten them to come. And he's looking out there and saying, "Look, it's already time to harvest the crops. The wheat is ready to be harvested." And they're saying, "He's losing it, guys." He's seeing people, he thinks it's wheat that is just walking toward us, something like that. But Jesus' mission satisfied him like no food could and energized him like no rest could. A few years ago, a good friend of mine by the name of Lee Brace, Lee was with the Navigators for over 30 years. He was the national prayer coordinator toward the end of his career. And he shared 4 things that we can do to increase our spiritual influence. This is good enough to write down. He said, first of all, pray for doors to be open. As we're going out, we just pray for opportunities for doors to be open. And he said we need to pray for eyes to see needs. That is to get beneath the surface of where people are and see where those sensitivities really are. Pray for eyes to see needs. And then he said, pray down barriers. We begin to pray for them purposely, to plead their case before God, whether they're a server at Applebee's or a person in any other establishment or anything else in our life, when we're actually praying that the barriers, whatever would separate them from a real relationship with God, that those things would be torn down. And then Lee said, get involved in their life. Get involved in their life. Go beyond just the surface, immediate conversation and look for ways where you can engage more fully in their life. And I believe the icing on the cake for Jesus was when later on he had an opportunity to listen to some personal testimonies. Jonah, let's read this final section of our text today.
Many Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me all that I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days. And many more believed because of his word. They said to the woman, "It is no longer because of what you said that we believe, for we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this is indeed the Savior of the world."
In this case, he heard stories of changed lives, first of all from the woman when she got hooked, but also from the others. When they said, "We no longer believe just because of what you said, now we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this man really is the Savior of the world." It all started with a casual conversation at the local watering hole. And within 2 days, the entire city was exposed to the living water. The water that sparkles and bubbles and quenches and satisfies and refreshes forever. Are you thirsty for that kind of water in your own life on this summer day? Do you know some people? Do you see some people on a regular basis who are dying for that kind of a drink? Who need that kind of refreshment that only comes from the one who gives living water? I'm going to ask that you take the connection card out if you haven't yet done so. And as you're doing that, start doing a little thinking about people that you engage on a regular basis in your life. The people that you engage with, perhaps in just friendly conversation. Maybe there are even some people that you've been purposely avoiding because of their religious, political, or moral values. We need to pray together that we're going to learn from Jesus to be more engaged with the people that we encounter on a daily basis.